and welcome to a frigid Washington, D.C. and Post Sports Live. The set is a lot warmer in here, guys. I hope you were kept warm on your commute.
Yeah, because I'm here.
Welcome back. Happy New Year,
I'm
LaVar.
the warm. Hello.
How you doing?
I'm good.
You have a good New Year's?
Sure.
Spent some time down in Florida?
I did. It wasn't hot.
But it wasn't as cold as this.
I did a 15-hour drive back.
It wasn't 7 degrees.
Because it was cold. And they canceled all kinds of flights, so 15-hour drive to get back so I could do
You drove
Washington
all the way
Post.
back? Dang, man, good for you. You are a dedicated contributor here. I
go.
appreciate that. Mr. Mike Wise is also joining us, and Dan Steinberg already rolling his eyes.
I know,
1 minute
I
into the
hate
show.
small talk at the start of the show. I was going to say, don't say anything about the cold. No one wants to hear us talk about the cold, but I forgot to.
But the fans, our loyal listeners want to know how we feel about small talk.
No, they don't. I think they'd be interested in our conversation about being tired of sports. I think they'd be interested in that. But.
I am tired of sports.
There you go.
Just so you know.
These are the conversations we have right before
You
air
have a
every
radio
week.
show based
Lots
on
to talk about today.
Yeah,
We're going to lead off with Robert Griffin III and his role in the next head coaching search. We talked a little bit about it last week, but we wanted to get your thoughts on the Sally Jenkins column that came out today, describing him as sort of a boy emperor and dictator at Redskins Park. We're going to talk about the coaching search today. What has surprised you so far of the myriad coach names that we've heard out there as potential interview subjects for the Redskins? We'll talk about the NFL divisional playoffs. We'll offer some bold predictions for this coming weekend's games. Some of us were pretty accurate in our bold predictions last week. We'll talk about that. And finally, we'll get to the Wizards and Caps. The Wizards can't get over the 500 hump. They've lost a couple, and the Caps are reeling as well, going into a critical stretch before the Winter Olympics. Dan, I want to start with you. Your take on the Sally Jenkins column that published today or last night on the web. She describes Robert Griffin III as a 23-year-old boy emperor who believes he can dictate everything from the play calling to what's served at the training table. And her argument is that he may be a negative and not as much of an asset for the next prospective head coach. What do you think?
I don't entirely agree with her. I think I agree with her a tiny bit, and I know that I disagree probably with LaVar about this. I think that you can't describe him as a hindrance without also acknowledging that he is an all-world talent, and that really, as much as we like to talk about it, there's not really a quarterback controversy. You're going into a place where you have a number 1 overall draft pick and a kid who was NFL's Offensive Rookie of the Year just a year ago, and so you know who your quarterback is, and there's a lot of teams in the NFL that can't say that. The Cleveland Browns cannot say that. They have a job opening and they don't know who their quarterback is. I think at least you're coming here and you know that you have a guy that can play at a high level in the NFL and that can be a winning quarterback on a division-winning team. But there's baggage there, and I think that baggage could certainly come to play for whoever takes this job.
Does the baggage outweigh the prospective upside to RG3 as quarterback, Mike?
No. Robert Griffin III is going to have a healthy Hall of Fame career as long as his body is
Hall of
healthy.
Fame?
Yeah, I think he could have a Hall. No, it's not sarcasm.
Wow.
I think Robert
That's
Griffin
a bold
III
prediction early
can
in the
have
show.
a Hall of Fame career. I refuse to believe that the guy who was the Messiah in cleats a year ago has somehow become the most rotten human being in America today on a sports team. It blows me away. The difference between 3-13 and 10-6 and going to the playoffs and winning the division for the first time in 12 years is somehow just a rotten human being behind center.
Well,
he's 23 years old. He might be a little green. He might be a little naive. Boy emperor, I thought it was a little strong. And based on my conversations with players in that locker room, unless they're just flat out lying, I know there's people who don't like him and they're frustrated in the moment, but the idea that somehow this guy is a cancer in the locker room and he's going to be a hindrance to the next coach is ridiculous. You may have a franchise quarterback here. I'm not saying for certain. You may have a franchise quarterback here for the next 10 to 15 years.
You're already going to be in the Hall of Fame. I was saying he might be a franchise.
I think he has a chance to be in the Hall of Fame.
And if he's a Hall of Famer, then he's a franchise
you
quarterback.
think his career is over?
To validate what Mike said, anybody who makes it to the NFL has a fair opportunity to be a Hall of Famer. That's as broad as we can make
well,
that.
Well, I will say this real quick.
I think that's the reality.
His body will have more to do with whether he makes the Hall of Fame and whether it holds up than his mind and the fact and the perception that he might be a cancer in that locker room.
All right, help or hindrance, LaVar?
I think he can be a help with the right coach. I think he can be a hindrance with the right coach, with the wrong coach, I guess I would say. If you bring in a coach that bows down to the pressures of what
let's add a minute to the clock
of what a player wants more specifically in this case what Robert Griffin III wants, that's a hindrance. If he comes in and it's very clear that what Robert Griffin III wants is more important than what the coach wants, that's a hindrance. If a coach comes in and he helps Robert understand that he can be a help, if he helps Robert understand that the potential that lies within this locker room, he can be the catalyst of, I think he can be a help. But I think it depends on the personality. And there's so many moving parts to if he's a help or if he's a hindrance. And that's what's sad, because all of this is falling on Robert Griffin III. But in actuality, it's been, and I've stated this numerous times, this has been the product that we're seeing right now, as Mike stated, going from Messiah in cleats to a villain and a cancer, is all based, in my opinion, off of mismanagement. They've mismanaged him. They've mismanaged the situations. They've mismanaged this season. And when I say they, I say it starts with ownership on down to, more importantly, his handler as it pertains directly to what he's doing in the media, his interviews. I think that's created the picture and the persona that he now has to deal with.
No doubt mismanagement. Quick follow-up question and a yes or no answer to you guys. And the question is being the sources for Sally's column. Do the finger-pointing sessions between him and wide receivers behind closed doors, it seems to indicate that there may be players, this may not be just coming from coaches, something to worry about down the road, Dan, yes or no, for as far as the sources go for Sally?
No, I would feel confident saying that every 3-win team in the NFL has had finger-pointing sessions between the quarterback and wide receiver.
You think?
Agreed, Mike?
Yeah, no.
Is that standard operating procedure, LaVar?
I think there's too much micromanaging or micro, kind of under the telescope type stuff going. Like, that's childish.
Okay.
Like, you're finger pointing. So I what I will say, and I know it's a yes and no, but what I will say is, I'll offer this, is that I think a standard has to be shattered and broken and recreated now that all this leaking and sources and all that culture took over this season. And will that continue on next year, or will a new coach, will the owner, will will the players decide that this is going to stop?
The new GM.
Will the GM? I mean, is there going to be a new GM?
That's a good segue. Well, the new GM is sort of the old GM, kind of. All right, Dan, I want to. That's a good segue to the coaching search. And Dan, what has surprised you, to date so far with the search?
I would think the obvious things. We haven't seen a lot of the hot, retired coach names. We haven't seen a lot of the hot college coaches. We've seen a lot of kind of workaday NFL coordinators, and a lot more than I think we would have guessed. Some of the names that we discussed on here last week have been there, like Wizen Hunt and Jay Gruden, Mike Zimmer, but there's been a lot of names we didn't talk about. McDermott from Carolina, the special teams guy from Dallas. There's been the defensive coordinator from San Francisco. They've just cast such a wide net, and I think it's a persuasive argument that Bruce Allen in some ways is using these not only as an interview, but also to get information from other people about how teams see his personnel, how teams see his schemes. He's talked to someone connected with the Giants, we'll talk to someone connected to the Giants, the Cowboys, and the Eagles, all the division rivals. I don't see how you can really complain about the way things have gone. Obviously, we don't know the result yet, but it's nice that they're casting such a wide net, I think.
Mike, what do you think?
You have a different take.
I mean, is Bruce Allen on a coaching search or a No Child Left Behind act? This is. Why don't you just advertise this job on Craigslist? You've got 11 candidates now. And look.
Wait a minute. Wouldn't you be saying that you got to cast a wide net, or else you'd criticize them on the other side?
No.
Last time they had Shanahan lined up 2 months in advance.
And it was and they violated a Rooney Rule, which they got Jerry, what's his name, Jerry Gray to acquiesce at the very last minute. Oh yeah, I had an interview. No, it was BS. One of these things about this coaching search is the only minority candidates are ones that they were suggested to them by the Fritz Pollard Alliance. I don't like that at all. If you're going to be serious about hiring a coach, then really be serious about hiring every coach of every ethnicity. Don't just do it because the Fritz Pollard Alliance told you to. Secondly, I have mixed feelings about this, because when people say they've tried everything else, if Shanahan doesn't work, well, Well, actually, they haven't. They haven't got the young, up-and-coming assistant. Jim Zorn was past his prime, and people always wondered why he didn't get a job. Now we know, but Jim Zorn wasn't that guy. These guys have the potential to be that guy. I like that about this coaching search. But the part I don't like is sort of, you've interviewed a special teams guy, you've interviewed a defensive, do you really know what you want in a coach? Do you really, if you don't know what you want, are you really competent to be the general manager?
Right.
Of
Do
this
you have a
football
real
team?
focus? That's a fair question.
And while you're interviewing, people are hiring the best candidates. Art Briles, if he comes, I think it's a disaster. But when you asked who the top 3 coaching candidates were to start this offseason, people said 3 names: Lovie Smith,
yep.
Bill O'Brien, and Ken Whisenhunt. Whisenhunt has been said to, the job is his in Detroit if he wants it. Already 2 jobs have been taken. Obviously, Lovie Smith, if he hadn't been contacted, and Bill O'Brien thought more of those 2 jobs than they did this job. That to me would be a concern.
LaVar, takeaways for the first week.
First takeaway is surprised and Redskins should not be in the same sentence. That's first and foremost. I mean, let's move away from that. Don't be surprised. All right?
All right.
Secondly, they have to cast a large net. For one, you continue to have to get head coaches. Since taking over this team, you have to continue to get new head coaches. Not one head coach has made it through their contract since Dan Snyder has been the owner of this team. That should be noted. Young up-and-coming coach, okay, is that career suicide to take this job? Will you ever get a head coaching opportunity after taking this job here?
Wow.
You're going to have to go after guys that are either A, as you mentioned, need another chance, need a second chance, and this is their only second chance, or B, could care less about if they win or lose by taking this job, which you're already starting off on the wrong foot, as we saw with Mike Shanahan. It's just difficult to say that this would be an easy search for this organization, as the reputation has spread like wild cancer. You cannot
Metastasized.
You cannot convince, whether they admit it or not. I would assume that most coaches are taking interviews with Washington to make themselves more valuable to another organization. If I look at Tampa, as bad as Tampa has been in, if I look at personnel-wise, they're better than the Redskins. If I look at Detroit and they continue to come up short, if I look at that team personnel-wise, they're better than the Washington Redskins. The same for Houston, and that's why O'Brien went there. You are not going to get a coach that can actually really turn this thing around to come here. It probably won't happen.
Give me the name if it was up to you, out of this list of so far that they've interviewed or will interview. Who's the name that you would hire?
I wouldn't want the job.
Well, not you, but if you were hiring somebody.
What I'm saying is I would not want the job of trying to hire a coach. I'd give up. I'd resign. If I'm Bruce Allen, I'd resign, because the bottom line is the problem. I would not sit on a panel to discuss who should be the next head coach, because they are going to get the same exact results. You could be the head coach of the Washington Redskins, because the Redskins head coach will get the same exact results as all the other ones.
I actually pitched you last week on this show. I said they should interview LaVar.
No, they should not.
LaVar wants no part of it.
All
right,
it is a bit.
Let's move on.
You don't get to ask us that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
who
would your name be?
Are
you guys comfortable answering that?
I mean, Ken Whisenhunt, because he's been here before and he's a name, but I think that's even short-sighted, because I don't necessarily think you need a name. You need to find the next Mike Tomlin. You need to find the next young guy that can actually do it.
You have to have a Mike Tomlin organization.
I like the Zimmer idea, honestly. I like the Zimmer idea. I like Forsythe's column. I like the fact that he's a defensive guy. I like what they did with that defense in Cincinnati, even after he lost his 2 best players. But I really like the idea of kind of having an offensive coordinator deal with the Griffin stuff and having the defensive guy.
How about the fact that Jay Gruden says he hates the read option? Does that make him more or less likely to be the next head coach?
Andy Dalton ran some read option.
They ran it, but he said he didn't like it. What does that mean? More or less likely? Quick one word. Less likely? It doesn't matter. All right,
the problem is bigger than
Let's move on to predictions. And we are changing our bold predictions format, guys. to regular old predictions because of a nice suggestion by our man, DC
I was
Sports Blog.
getting sick of coming up with bold stuff. Just regular old predictions.
Our record was so laughable last year in our bold predictions that we talked about at the end of the year that we're going to change our bold predictions to just regular old predictions. And last week, actually, we actually hit a couple. So maybe once we're not talking about the Redskins, we're actually more accurate.
Oh, you were on too.
I was on too. I had 3 out of 4 road teams winning. Although I did think that the road team that would win would be Kansas City. I expected Cincinnati to be the one.
Yeah. Okay. So you're not right on
Dan,
that.
Dan had the 2 NFC.
Right.
No, that's why I got a half point.
Oh,
if you look at the graphic, Mike, you nailed the San Diego call over Cincinnati.
Thank you.
LaVar, you weren't here. Jason copped out and said whatever Dan said. So. With that said, great matchup, great slate of games this week in the divisional round. Dan, give me a bold prediction, a regular prediction for this weekend's matchups.
You know, I actually was going to go bold this week, despite my regular old promise. I am predicting for the second week in a row that the 2 road teams in the NFC win.
Wow.
That New Orleans goes to Seattle and wins, and that San Francisco goes.
San Francisco beats Seattle?
No, San Francisco would beat Carolina.
San Francisco beat Carolina.
San Francisco beats Carolina.
That's actually not that bold.
And New Orleans, but New Orleans wins in
New
Seattle.
Orleans at Seattle.
New Orleans at Seattle after the way they got blown
Both
out.
road
That's
NFC
a big.
Seattle kind of stumbled down the stretch a little bit, and I like the way New Orleans is playing.
Yep, I like that. What do you got, Mike?
I think Tom Brady throws 6 touchdowns against the Colts secondary this weekend.
A Patriots route. What do you like, LaVar? Maybe a route. I don't know. Maybe the Colts can score.
Yeah, it's going to be 82-81.
For the playoffs, I guess I would say a bold prediction would be
this week's round.
I did say this week, didn't I?
Okay.
Did I say this week?
You said for the playoffs.
I believe he said this week, Forsythe.
Yeah, I did.
Did you say this week?
I think I said this.
All right.
This week.
Continue. Back on the rails.
I think that San Diego will beat the Broncos.
Wow.
Everybody's going bold. This is supposed to be just the regular old predictions.
Okay, go ahead. What do you got, John?
All right. I was just going to say, I think the most likely road team to win is actually Indianapolis at New England. I think New England is so banged up.
I don't give them a chance at all. I know Spikes is out. I know they're banged up, but they
at
win.
At some point, the Patriots run, and the injuries are going to catch up to them. I think it could be this weekend.
They win in
I'll
the
give you the
playoff.
Colts. That'll be my prediction.
I'm going to give you the
Let's move on, guys, to the Wizards.
The Bolts.
Mr. Steinberg.
Sir.
Why can't the Wizards, they've lost 3 in a row, they reached 500 twice this year. Why can't they get over the 500 mark?
I wondering the question myself. Bradley Beal has not played particularly well since he came back from the injury. He's on the innings. He's on the minutes restrictions, which I think might be messing with his head a little bit somehow. And they've got Nene on a minutes restriction too. He's coming off the bench, which seemed to work well for a while, but I don't know. I don't totally buy Randy Whitman's excuse about the team just can't handle prosperity or whatever. I don't know that this is a mental problem with them. Watching that Golden State game, Golden State just seemed to be a different level of talent and a different level of depth than the Wizards have. So maybe this is who they are. They're just not good enough to be the
flirt with that 500 mark.
I really think that the minutes thing is messing with Beal a little bit, though. He just doesn't seem like the same player.
I agree with him.
Mike, why can't they get past 500?
I think Dan hit it on the head, depth. Michael Lee, who does a great job covering the beat for us, had this story about how well some of the bench guys have been playing and their numbers. Well, the reason is they've had to play those minutes because they don't have Nene and Beal to play some of those minutes, and players, frankly, that are big-time NBA players. They don't have the requisite number of bodies to offset a bad night from John Wall, offset a bad night from Bradley Beal, offset a bad night from Martell Webster. And so I just feel like the main players on this roster have to do so much. Do I think they make the playoffs? Yeah, because the East is so bad. But what does it matter if you get knocked out real quick?
Well, I still think, despite what I just said, I still think that they're a real threat to make it to the second round of the playoffs.
They're still the 5 seed currently. They're 14,
you have
17.
to look at these other teams.
There's about 50 games left in the season. They're still the 5 seed in the East. So they're still right there in the mix.
If they won a playoff series, it'd be the first
time. If they had home
in
court, it would be a small victory.
Well, not the way they play at home.
LaVar, around.
LaVar, give me. Why can't they go
shot clock
above
is
5?
frozen?
Yeah, the shot clock's busted.
We're totally now on.
The cold. It's probably the cold temperatures, Dan.
LaVar, what do you got, LaVar?
I think it's Nene. Nene. He's the key, and I've said that as a constant theme. And the key to this team ever being able to get to the next level is going to be having a big man presence. I really do. When you had Gilbert Arenas and Larry Hughes and those guys here, and they were making playoffs, or Jameson and Caron Butler, as crazy as it may sound, a guy like Brendan Hayward made a difference for this team down low. They have to have a down low presence, and until they can get a down low presence of my opinion, of mass status, like a Dwight Howard, a dominant force, which Shaquille O'Neal, I don't know that we'll see another one, but even like a Roy Hibbert, until we get a down low presence for this group, they're not going to be able to get to that next level, and I think that's the biggest key for them.
But Nene and Gortat are definitely a step above what they'd had.
I think it's a step above, but
it's not enough. You're saying?
It would be enough if he could stay healthy.
Yeah, if Nene stays healthy, I think that works.
We got 51 games left in the regular season. They're 3 games under 500. What's the best case scenario, Dan, do you think, as far as their final record at this point, knowing what we know about the team?
I mean, I still think that it's likely for them to be a couple games above 500 when they finish the season. And I think that could very well land them with a 5 or 6 seed, which is the position that they need to be in to possibly advance to the second round.
42 and 40, something around there.
A little bit higher even, I think.
Would you agree with that, Mike?
Yeah, but I disagree with Dan on the notion that Randy Whitman said. I don't think they handle prosperity well. I think there's something to be said for both times you got to 500. You played a couple weeks, sister. You didn't just play the Warriors afterwards, and you could not do anything. So all of a sudden these guys started hearing good things about themselves for the first time in forever. And there was a mental letdown. And so I'm not saying that was the defining reason. I believe the defining reason was what he said, depth, and the fact that Beal and Nene are limited minutes-wise. But I also think there's a mental thing, too, where you think you've accomplished something at 500.
It seems like a simple answer, but to your point, and remember when we had Gortat on the live post-sports live, they had just reached 500 for the first time, 9-9.
Now we got some
and he
easy
mentioned
games.
a couple of easy games upcoming, which
Milwaukee
they promptly lost.
Yeah, that's right.
So there may be something to that. All right, let's transition, guys, to the Caps. Another team that's scuffling right now. Had lost 4 in a row. 2 of them, though, they got points for. One a shootout, one in overtime. They're currently in 3rd place. They're in the playoffs if the season ended today, but they'd be the 8th seed, Dan. How important is this stretch? They've got 17 games until the Winter Olympics break, and then they have the break for the Olympics. How important is this stretch for the Caps?
I mean, I think it's important for obvious reasons. I mean, whatever, 17 games is a huge part of the season. Of course it's going to be important, but I think one of the big parts of it is that they're going to have a lot of games on the road coming up. And they need to get points on the road. They need to win games on the road. And I think that they need to beat some of the better opponents. Their strength of schedule thus far has been one of the weaker ones in the NHL. I don't know what extent that matters, but there's this
RPI.
There's this issue that we've talked about too before, that so many of their points have come in shootouts and these overtime wins, which is sort of less of a mark of a good team than regulation wins would be. So I think they need to prove to themselves they're a good team and a good team that can win on the road. I think it's important.
Mike?
My concern would be that Adam Oates has tethered his ship to Alex Ovechkin so much, and in a good way, because he's definitely tapped into the best things he can do, and turned into a really productive scorer. But I'm more worried about what he has as a roster. And I think when you say that these next few games before the Olympic break are important, I believe they're more important for George McPhee than anybody. George McPhee, it's not widely publicized, but this is he is not under contract next year. He has to win some. I believe he has to get that team to a couple rounds this year. And I believe that if he doesn't trade for some capable defensemen and get rid of some of the AHL guys that are great guys and getting good experience, but they're not defensemen, they're going to take you to the next round in the playoffs. If he doesn't trade for those guys, whether it's dangling a goalie or somebody else out there, he's going to find himself on another team next year. I would not be shocked if George McPhee is gone after this year, if that roster is comprised like it is and barely misses the playoffs and or gets knocked out in a blowout of the first round.
LaVar, do you think it's time to be worried that this team could miss the playoffs, given where they stand right now? There's a couple teams right behind them with 45 points.
Historically speaking, no. If we're looking at what they do historically, when the games start to really matter, they come on and they respond.
Like last year, for sure.
So, I mean, they've done it a few times. I will say this. My biggest observation of the Capitals has been they are a finesse team. And we've always watched them succumb to more physical teams. And I mean, we're talking about McPhee, and we've talked about the different coaches that have come in and have coached this team. I just find it interesting that we look at a team that they're about scoring. When they had Boudreau and it was going good for them, they had offensive explosions, and it didn't matter how many you scored on them, they'd be able to outdo you. They'd be able to outduel you. I'm just wondering, at what point in time do you change the philosophy of how it applies to going about your business? They don't want to be a physical team. They want to outskate you. They want to do things in a way that are different than that. But I think when we look at the teams that win, they're more physical. And I just wonder, is that the reason why they can't get to the next step, the next level?
The core, the young gun
say
core.
too, I mean, this is like another obvious point, but when you have a roster that three players on your team have demanded asked for a trade at least, and the goalie, your starting goalie, had some bad performances, got benched for what felt like 3 weeks, 2 weeks, came back, had a bad performance, and said that he's lost his confidence. That speaks to some kind of roster management issues, and I think if we saw this kind of stuff with the Redskins, it'd be DEFCON 1 for us. 3 players on the team asking for a trade, and a starting goalie saying he's lost his confidence because he got benched. I mean,
the difference is the Caps make the playoffs every year, though.
Well, but
that's a huge difference.
It's a good point, though. He's right. Katie Carrera's story the other day, in detailing some of that, really got into it's not team turmoil, but that
still worse.
In hockey, you don't get guys speaking out like that as much.
Right.
In other sports, you do. Hockey, whatever, there's an omerta, there's a code, like, oh, we're in the locker, we'll keep this in the locker room.
Erod did that to get here in the first place, so it's not exactly,
that's true.
It's not new from his perspective.
Adam Oates did it to get out of St. Louis years ago.
I mean, it's definitely something to keep an eye on. 8 games in 13 days coming up, guys.
Their window is certainly closing.
Their window is closing. Lots to catch up on. We'll make sure to follow up on the Caps next week. Our window is closing right now, so that'll be the end of the show. For Dan Steinberg, Mike Wise, LaVar Arrington, thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live. We'll see you right here next week.
It's a subdued ending from you.
What do you want? You don't want this one?